wow, I'm live. This is very exciting. I've never done a live before, and obviously currently I'm speaking to hey Natasha, hey. One person. Oh wow. Now it's my first live ever, so I'm probably gonna be making loads of mistakes. So feel free to correct me or say what you want, say anything that you want, and just feel free to bombard me with questions, really. Also, for all of those of you who suddenly accidentally click on a live and are like, oh shit, I didn't want to watch this live, I take no offense. I have done that plenty of times in this pandemic. So feel free to leave, to stay, grab yourself a cup of tea. We're going to be here for about 40 minutes and we're going to be talking about all things mental health. So, hello everyone. Welcome to my live. This is crazy. I've never done a live before, which is pathetic and very millennial sounding. But there we go. So the first thing I actually wanted to talk about, I adjusted my class a little bit, given everything that's going on. And I actually wanted to talk about the work that we need to do as white allies and dealing with the complexities of emotion whilst doing the work, whilst not putting pressure on black lives and black people, right? This is really, really important. And I just want to preface that, say that I'm not an anti-racism teacher, nor will I ever and should I be, because that role is preserved solely for people of colour and black people who have been harmed by white people's actions, beliefs, and the systemic oppression that has inculcated and infiltrated into their lives. But what I will try and say, guys, is that I know we're probably going to be really overwhelmed by everything that's going on, but we have to remember that people of colour and black people have been experiencing this daily. Like, we might feel a bit guilty or feel exhausted by everything that's going on, but frankly, that is that's nothing compared to what they actually have to manage and cope with every single day. So I thought it would be really appropriate for us to talk about how to be a white ally and managing our mental health whilst doing the work. And it goes without saying, whilst we have to acknowledge that our guilt and our emotions and our feelings don't even trump the suffering and the oppression and racism faced by black people, we can still do our own self-care and still validate and acknowledge those emotions, right? It's really, 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 really important. Because otherwise, if you have an empty cup, there's no way you can do the work. You can't be an ally, and you can't educate yourself. If you get into that kind of self-pitying, self-wallowing hole, there's no way you're going to buy any anti-racism classes, donate to activists, get the voice out there, and also contradict and challenge racist opinions and biases that we all have. I've got shit I need to work on, and you're gonna make mistakes. I'm gonna make mistakes. We all will. The key is that we keep working on it, and that we don't try and use black people as a means of emotional validation and emotional soothing. We have to do the work ourselves, and we have to self-soothe ourselves. So some things that we can try and do is I found it's quite useful to look at it in kind of in terms of a balanced diet, right? Emotional diet. It's very, very healthy to have all these kinds of emotions about doing the work and about trying to do the anti-racism work. But what's important is that we look at things that aren't extreme and things that are extreme. So for instance, it's actually pretty normal to feel that guilt and that shame, because we have been, part of this system that has been a result of us utilising our privilege and utilising basically our skin colour, even subconsciously or unconsciously. We haven't been aware of this to actually get forth and get ahead in life. So it's really important that whilst we have these mixed feelings about that, we try and take practical action at the same time, which I think you can do. So I would advise to you guys, if you are someone who is trying to make themselves more of a white ally, maybe it's better if you try and make a schedule saying, I'm gonna read a black philosopher or a black activist for 20 minutes this morning, and then I'm going to maybe talk to my friend, talk to my friend who is white and talk to them about what I read today and what I learnt. So that's 35 minutes of the day. And then you might have those weird guilt-ridden feelings, that weird anxiety, that weird kind of hot self-consciousness in your gut. Maybe dedicate half an hour, 20 minutes of your time that day to try and distract yourself from it. Not to say to forget about it or to forget that you need to do the work consistently, but it's just about balance, right? It's about acknowledging those icky emotions and then making sure you're still doing the work and still being practical about it and still honouring it. Because sometimes there's a lot of research that has shown if we kind of just get ourselves too deep in our emotions and we sort of fixate on them, and for instance, if we say we are anxious and we have anxiety and we feel guilt about this, etc., and we try so hard to fix it and end up chasing our tails like a little dog, we end up getting worse. We end up feeling worse because we're just fixated on the emotion. So I know a lot of people say escapism is bad, or that you're not you need to be present. Sometimes escapism is very much needed. This is not necessarily from a mental health professional, but one of my favourite ever writers, Neil Gaiman, and I think fiction writing and reading is incredibly important for feeling good and for cultivating a sense of empathy for others, which is what we need right now the most. He actually said escapism's not bad because when you go into another world, when you're in this fantasy realm with elves or monsters or ghosts, you actually gain the weapons you need to go out there into the real world and fight. You go into that world feeling depressed, feeling low about what's going on in your life outside in here, and then you go into your favourite book and you just dive into these stories, these magical characters and everything, and you feel more empowered, you feel emboldened by what that character has done, or you feel inspired by the storyline that transpires, and you think, I can take X and bring it into Y in the boring real world, right? So we can actually use escapism to advantage, whether it be a really cool video game or a really cool TV show or a really cool book, whatever we want. Fiction is really, really good for self-soothing and also for teaching us life skills that we can utilise in our own emotional self-soothing. And that's really important because I just want to preface this section by saying, as white allies or as white people trying to dismantle this system, we cannot rely on people of colour or black people to do that work for us. We have to do it ourselves because it's cruel, it's not fair, because they have been inculcated with this cruelty and racism all their lives, and to just expect that emotional labour is it's kind of typical white people. So don't be a typical white person. Really do your best to go inwards, create a circle of fellow white people who want to be allies and want to do better, you know, and get together and make sure you're supporting each other. You can use that circle to voice your frustration or your guilt because you're not exhausting black people or people of colour. You're using each other's resources and educational tools to get better and to make sure that you're also looking after yourself whilst you're doing the work. That's very important. You can't do the work if you're completely empty, right? So now that I want to get that out of the way, I thought that would be really important to talk about because this is something that's going to be ongoing. We have to keep doing this. We can't just have another tragedy and feel like, I'm going to do the work now. It has to be consistent. So I thought talking about the ways you can do that and ways you can manage the emotions that you feel was really important because otherwise people will just feel overwhelmed and feel like, well, there's no point me doing it because apparently I can't feel, which is not true. You can feel whatever the hell you want to feel. It's completely valid. It's what you do with those feelings and the behaviour thereafter that's the most important. So your feelings are super normal, as we know, and I don't know about you, but in this pandemic, everyone's feelings have been completely up and all over the place, right? And I've spoken to many people actually who have said and voiced their concern because they're feeling this anxiety, they're feeling these depressive episodes, and this weirdness, like this weird floatiness, and they've never really been diagnosed with mental illness and mental health problems before. So they're almost at a loss what to do, or they're concerned they might have a diagnosis at play. Well, first of all, in terms of diagnosis, it's really important to know that emotions and feelings and moods by themselves and in of themselves are completely normal. So let's say, for instance, I'm a very messy person. So I might leave stuff in the flat all over the place. And bear in mind, it's a lockdown. So my boyfriend can't avoid me. And let's say I leave stuff aside and I don't bother to tidy it up. My boyfriend is going to be, rightfully so, very annoyed at me. This is obviously based on a true story, as you can tell. And he has absolutely every reason to, because we were in a confined space and I am not acknowledging his need for a clean, happy space. So just because he's annoyed or upset doesn't mean he has depression or anxiety or some kind of bipolar disorder. He's simply exhibiting a normal, natural reaction. Now, I actually like to think of this pandemic or this general lockdown or confinement, frankly, as a collective trauma, because we are behaving in ways that are very unusual to normal human behaviours. Even introverts like myself need to be able to go out to the park, to meet people one-on-one, to go to book clubs, you know, something like that. Just because I'm not going, you know, we're not going shopping or going clubbing or something like that, doesn't mean we don't require human social nourishment. So this is a very normal reaction to feel all these weird feelings. We're completely thrust out of routine. And when we're thrust out of routine, what happens sometimes with the brain is that it freaks out big time. Because our brain has a little alarm signal, right? And it's called the amygdala. And it's like this little bean, and it's kind of in the center of the brain. And what happens is, when we have this fire alarm setup going on, when something untoward happens in our life, the brain can't discern whether that's a threat, a perceived threat, or something that's just a general change. So if there's a massive change, what tends to happen is that fire alarm just starts ringing and ringing and ringing. Doesn't know what else to do. It's the only thing it can do to communicate to you, the body, the fleshy human, that something is wrong and needs to be acted upon. So what ends up happening is we go into this chronic state of this kind of really kind of broken, offset fire alarm constantly because something's wrong and we can't fix it. We're powerless. We can't stop the lockdown and we can't stop the confinement. So it's really, really normal that this manifests into all kinds of things. Anxiety, potential obsessive compulsive disorder thinking, if you are inclined to that, and just general sadness and feelings of listlessness. There's only so many episodes of, what are we watching? We're watching How to Get Away with Murder, which is great. There's only so many episodes of that you can watch without going slightly insane, without actually going insane. And that's really, really normal. So as you can tell, there is a spectrum, right? I like to think of it as kind of a continuum or traffic light system. If we're green, we're kind of good to go. And even when we feel these upsets and downs and lows, we can say, yes, no, I'm fine. I can cope. I can get out of bed. I can do things. Then you have amber, which is kind of like, I've been in a funk for a few days and I feel like something's amiss in my body and in my mind. I keep having these ruminating thoughts and I can't quite discern them and I can't seem to deal with them as well as I used to. However, I can still get out of bed, I can do my job from home, I can do my exercise, etc., etc. And then you have the red light, which is, this is affecting my function to live. I can't get out of bed, I'm crying all the time, I might be having overwhelmingly anxious thoughts, I might be having panic attacks, etc. So you can see that even the amber to the red, there is a difference there. And I don't ever want to say to someone, like, you don't get diagnosed, it's pointless, because I think that's pseudoscience. There is obviously hordes of evidence for the biomedical method, i.e. looking at us through a lens of brain and body. But I also think it's important we look at the whole picture, a psychological and sociological phenomenon going around us. So just because you are feeling anxious and depressed doesn't mean you have depression or have anxiety. So I kind of propose a nice method when you're dealing with these feelings and you can't have access to a therapist, or frankly, you might not have the diagnosis for something that's life-changing, right? It could be a response to trauma, a collective trauma that we're all facing. So when in those cases, a lot of the evidence is pointing to things like trauma-based responses and PTSD as the most efficient way of treatment to be talking therapy, right? Like me chatting to you guys on the screen, or chatting to a friend, or calling up a loved one, and even if you need to, getting a therapist to unravel those thoughts that you're really feeling. So I think a really good method for trying to accept and own those emotions is a method called ACT, which is acceptance. It's acceptance therapy, basically, acceptance and compassion therapy. And I like it a lot because in this methodology, you have to try and use words to try and describe what is going on in the inside of our heads, which sounds so stupid and silly and basic, I know, but it literally means dissecting those feelings, which can be very painful to sit with. So I would recommend, if you are feeling in this weird space, literally getting a piece of paper down, scribbling down your feelings, and maybe doing like a mind map or a spidergram of some sort, making sure that you're talking about your feelings in great detail and discussing how how it came to be, why you're feeling that way, what do you do when you feel that feeling, how does your body feel when you feel that feeling? Because there's always a physical manifestation when it comes to anxiety, depression, because the brain and body are very much linked. The brain sends a lot of signals to the muscles and joints. So a very common symptom, for instance, with anxiety is feeling really, really tight and just getting either tingles or numbness or a lot of tight muscles, or feeling of tightness in the muscles. It's a very normal response. So making sure you're able to, you're not even able, but that you have the chance to try and articulate what's going on in your head. And sometimes it doesn't make sense. And sometimes that's absolutely fine, right? It's absolutely fine for us to not understand what's going on in our heads. I think there's such a pressure for us to have to be really, really like the Zen master or a psychologist of our own brains. When in reality, half the time we don't even know what's going on in there. A lot of it is unconscious mental processing, like subliminal actions or automatic habits, right? An automatic habit might be picking your nails when you're anxious. Half the time you don't really realize it's going on there, right? But it's a reaction to the external stimuli around you. So ACT is a really nice way of being quite accepting, literally, of your feelings. And I personally think the more that we accept our feelings and the more we try not to be so pseudo-positive, actually the faster those feelings go. Because I think that one of the worst things that you can feel in a situation like this, when you're feeling alone and when you're feeling lost, and I can imagine, I can't speak for them, but I can imagine lots of people of colour right now have been feeling like this for years, is that feeling of emotional invalidation, that no one believes you, that no one can actually, consider how you're feeling and really, really take it on board, if that makes sense. So, for instance, if I said to someone, I'm feeling really low and depressed, they might look at me and say, well, why? You've got an amazing life. You feel you've got so much going on and you're a very lucky person. Objectively, of course, I know that. But if I'm in a state of mind where my brain neurotransmitters are literally not receiving or sending the appropriate chemicals, of course I'm going to feel really low. Of course I'm going to feel really bad, and I can't help that. But so you need that validation to say, I can imagine this must be really painful for you, which is why when you're in lockdown and confinement, where the hell are you going to get it from? Especially if you're living on your own. So I think with stuff like this, I have to say social media can be both a blessing and a curse, but I find that if you follow appropriate hashtags like hashtag mental health, hashtag depression, hashtag anxiety, funnily enough, you can get people to have a really heartfelt discussion with you, and you can feel accepted. You can feel like your emotions are valid and that you're not, I hate this term, but so many times when I speak to people, I sometimes feel like, oh my God, I'm not going crazy. This person knows how I'm feeling. And that can be in of itself an incredibly healing sensation, to know that you're grounded and that you're seen and that someone is like, yeah, cool. Like, I can totally imagine you feeling that way. How can I support you? How can I show up for you? The worst is when someone tries to justify or to, try and invalidate or to try and say things like, this doesn't make sense. This is not logical. It's not rational. You don't choose your feelings, really. Your feelings are actually a reaction to the external circumstances around you. And that's based off your nervous system. So if you are in a very chaotic environment, lots of noise, lots of chaos, unpredictable things going on, your nervous system is going to be like, whoa, I don't know what to do here. I don't know what to say. And then it starts to react to that, because your brain and body will start to go into what we call the fight or flight response, right? And suddenly, because of all this chaos, your nervous system is going to act on that big time, and it's going to infiltrate into your thoughts. So it's kind of like a knock-on effect. That's how you get the physical manifestations. That's why so many people in lockdown are feeling this way. And that's why so many times we're like, I don't know why, but I'm suddenly feeling really anxious. The nervous system is trying to do the work for us and processing all of this. So it's really important that we try and find some semblance of calmness or some semblance of peace in all of this. Otherwise, we're never going to find that validation or acceptance that we need, if that makes sense. And that can be really, really tough. So I would suggest trying to find things like online forums, even things, as I said, Instagram hashtags, and trying to find someone in your life. And if not, I know loads of therapists who do sliding scales as well. So you can just talk to a counsellor or something like that, just to get everything off your chest and for someone to say, yes, what you're experiencing is completely normal. And finding one of those outlets and being able to be in a safe space for that nervous system to just calm down and to feel like, yeah, cool, no, I can sort out my thoughts and feelings now. So another thing I want to talk about regarding that acceptance, regarding that that introverted look towards our feelings and what we experience, is meditation. Now, I posted on this, sorry, I'm going to take a sip of my tea. That's good tea. I've been speaking a lot, so I was like, oh, my throat. So meditation is an interesting topic. A lot of people, rightfully so, say meditation is great, do it. Meditation is really good for helping you calm down with anxious thoughts, do it. Lockdown, meditate. And I absolutely agree to an extent. But I think, like all things in science, it's never black or white, right? It's never black or white. There's always a nuance there, and there's always really, really good research and science that suggests another alternative. And that's the beautiful thing about science, right? You can say one thing at some time, and then ages down the line, it's like, maybe that's not right. Maybe we should have a look at it again. And meditation is very, very good for people suffering mood disorders like depression or anxiety, or those who just need time to just be able to sit with everything, especially when you've got a million things going on in your life, particularly now when you've got a million things coming into your life externally, via the news, via social media, everything. But for people who have suffered from past trauma or are currently undergoing a trauma response, that's really tricky to deal with, because again, when we think about that nervous system response, if you're currently in a state of trauma or trauma responding, that nervous system's always going to be up. You're going to be in what we call a state called the sympathetic nervous system all the time, basically, because that's the way your body's trying to deal with all that stress, because it constantly feels a threat. So if you are meditating and you have had a trauma response or undergoing a traumatic response, let's say you've been diagnosed with PTSD, for instance, meditation can, and I do say the word can because obviously it can go the other way as well, meditation can and may hamper with your recovery, because it forces you to be undergoing very, very, very painful feelings and sitting with them, and also potentially having flashbacks or visualizations of the past trauma. There's some really good papers I can link to that, and they were longitudinal studies as well, which basically means they were looking at the participants for a long period of time, so it wasn't just a one-off, and the sample size looked pretty good too. So all I'm saying is, if you have happened to have some kind of trauma response, be mindful about meditation. It can certainly help. Just do it in a safe environment. And I also want to play devil's advocate here and say meditation can be excellent for all of us. I meditate all the time. It's just quite a cliched way of suggesting wellness and health. I know that. It's certainly not a bad thing, but I also understand some people will look at it and be like, for God's sake, I've meditated before and it hasn't worked, which is very normal. So it's important as well to not judge yourself if a methodology that was once espoused as being the best damn thing ever just doesn't sit right with you. Frankly, one of my meditations is playing video games. I'm still playing Final Fantasy VII Remake. It's absolutely amazing. Would highly recommend it. Because I feel like I can shut off my thoughts for a bit, because normally my head's going, as you can tell from the way I speak, about 1 million miles a minute. So for me, I just need to do things that require less sometimes I need to be doing something completely brainless and escaping. Like I said before, escapism can be really, really healthy. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that sometimes the typical things espoused by mental health practitioners doesn't have to work for people. That's why I really like ACT, acceptance compassion based therapy, because it doesn't have to be kind of stereotypical. I just got a comment about meditation is lo-fi music or editing photos. Amazing. Yeah, exactly. Sometimes it is doing something and being so involved in it that is actually much more meditative than sitting in a cross-legged position with candles all around you thinking all I can think about is how stressed I am. And that's not to say you can't practice meditation and understand it, but I think meditation purists also have to understand some people won't actually latch onto it, and it can be more harmful for them than good. Again, I really like meditation. I have no dog in the fight. I'm just also pinpointing the science that suggests that's why if something doesn't work for you, there's a reason for it. You're not insane. It's a valid response and it's really normal. So We're cutting into like nearly half an hour in, so I'm going to carry on talking and sipping tea, obviously. But if you have a question or anything or comment, please go ahead. I mean, what I probably do is going to talk about my own experience of depression and how I managed it and how I managed depressive episodes. But I just want to preface now that everyone is so different. So the reason I say this is not for you to copy me, because it's going to be really different. But it's just sometimes nice to know that, oh, hey, someone might have felt really low too. And I wasn't crazy, you know, it's a valid experience. And I think sharing experiences can be nice. So, sipping my tea. It's a good tea, by the way. It's called, it's from Yogi Tea, and it's the love one. And they often, I know it's the well-being one, and they have really cute, wholesome quotes. So this one is, only with self-respect you can respect others, which is very apt to what I was talking about before. I picked this by accident. I didn't know I would say that. So I'm going to chat about my, yes, Natasha, meditation. Again, it can actually help you concentrate. I found when I started meditating, it was really hard. But then it helps you kind of be able to have a filter, to acknowledge which thoughts are kind of useful and which aren't. So again, I really like meditation because it helps me be more selective in what thoughts are useful and what isn't. But again, for someone who might have PTSD, it might be enormously dangerous for them. That's why I'm saying this to people who might have or are undergoing a trauma response right now. But yeah, meditation is great. It's a good challenge for the mind. What does it contain? Chamomile. I need to check the box, but it's really good. This one's got, I think, cinnamon and some earthy spices in. They have really unusual combinations. Yogi Tea is the brand, and they do delicious ones, really good ones. Yes, for sure. ADHD, if someone has got a diagnosis of ADHD, meditation will be so useful for them because it helps you narrow in and practice some that focus, which can be really difficult. And again, you're dedicating time to it and dedicating your specific day to it, which normally it just kind of falls apart when you're doing things every single day on a daily basis because there's so much stimulus. But when you take away the stimulus, you can really train a particular region in your brain to stay we call it in psychology to master that attentional control. There's some really interesting papers on that, on like Stroop tests and everything like that. Stuff you can actually do for not necessarily brain training, but things that help that region activate a bit more. And I will say this, there's some really interesting papers suggesting that cardiovascular activities help ADHD. So going for runs regularly often helps blood flow to that region, so it's just a bit easier for you to focus. I also agree martial arts has helped me enormously. Brazilian jiu-jitsu helps my anxiety so much, even though sometimes it makes it worse, if that makes sense. I consider it a form of exposure therapy, and that's basically when you face something you don't want to face, because it then tells that fire alarm system in your brain you're actually safe, even though you thought it was a threat, and even though you thought it was very dangerous, it's actually fine. And it's really, really good at basically slowly getting you used to being very uncomfortable. It teaches you how to be uncomfortable. So yeah, I would highly recommend martial arts. In general, cardio has been shown to be amazing for intercepting certain regions of the brain. Now newer research is also looking at resistance training in general, which seems to have basically the same effects. So all I can say is that exercise has helped like massively. I'm a nice 1-stripe white belt. I can't believe I used to be 1-stripe white belt. I'm a blue belt, but a very bad one. I shouldn't be a blue belt at all. I totally agree with that actually. There is a massive link with creativity and neuroatypical brains, simply because of the way the structure of the brain changes and how we, I say we because I have Asperger's, so I feel the vibe. The way we interpolate and interpret information and also express ourselves is different, which ends up looking kooky and creative. Thank God for odd brains, eh? But yes, so completely lost track. Sorry guys, but I wanted to talk about my depression and generally my experience with it. So I was diagnosed with depression, like severe depression, when I was about 16, 17, and that's when you know, I was self-harming. Oh, high five, Kerry. Yeah, no, it is really similar. Isn't it? It's annoying though when people think Asperger's is autism. I know it's a very old-fashioned way of thinking, and it's quite easy to mistake that. But it's a sign that still there's a lot of stigma around that. But yes, high five. We've got creative brains, which is pretty cool. And I like it. It means you offer. You know, the beauty about different brains is that you have different things to offer that other people might not have foreseen. It's a very good advantage. Again, I'm sorry, I keep going off track. So I was diagnosed with severe depression when I was about 17, and I just didn't know how to deal with it. So I was self-harming. I was, you know, suicide attempts, which were a really fun time of my life. Now, at this point, I started taking medication, and I will say medication really helped me. It basically saved my life. So I know a lot of people have a lot of stigma and malevolence towards medication or uncertainty. And that's not to say there's problems with overdiagnosing, or there's problems with giving the wrong pills, or just assuming someone needs pills right off the bat. But that's also a very black and white way of thinking, because simultaneously they have literally they have literally prevented mass suicides from happening annually. So it's about having a nuanced approach to medication. They often enable you to do the things that help your mental illness that you wouldn't have been able to do without the medication. One of my friends had a really good way of putting it, that depression, you can't just, you know, someone who has depression can do all the things that allegedly make them feel better, like, you know, meditation and journaling and writing. But the point about depression is that even after they do all those things, they'll still feel absolutely rubbish. So that's kind of an indication if there is something more further along that spectrum, as I talked about earlier, that might be a time to go see a professional or to get you checked out. But my depression was very severe. But then later down the line, I was actually re-diagnosed with bipolar type 2, which kind of makes sense being creative, which basically means that I don't have mania, but I might have periods of time where my hypermania just looks like writing till like 1 a.m. or I can't, my brain is like basically on Adderall, like I can't rest. It's a bit like having depression and anxiety at the same time, and it's very comorbid. So I find things like routine help enormously. If you have a mental illness, if you're struggling with mental health, I cannot stress this enough, having a routine helps enormously. Maybe I'm biased because my brain is a little bit this way and a little bit that way, so I need something a bit stable. Yes, Natasha, absolutely is. And what ends up happening is that, for instance, depression, because bipolar, the disorder, type 1, type 2, and that there is another form of it as well, it doesn't actually develop until you're in your 20s, really. So they can't, to be fair to professionals, they can't really diagnose when you're like a teenager or when you're younger. They can only go with depression. Same with personality disorders, like by borderline personality disorder can only be diagnosed when you're, say, an adult. Because that's when they can have a look at your pattern of behaviour and see if there's something going on there. You can't really diagnose when you're younger or under 18. That's what the DSM advises, really, and most professionals and psychiatrists. But yes, routine is number one. As you can see, I'm definitely going off routine with this chat. Routine, I find, helps me even when I have a depressive episode, or when I'm, you know, in a really, really anxious, to the point where I feel myself shivering. Even if I can do one little thing, like I get up, maybe make the bed, I fold my laundry or something, I help my boyfriend with the laundry, or I get down and try and write 100 words, something like that. Even when I'm in a low spot, it helps me keep a rhythm, and it means I can get out of the episode a bit quicker and a bit more smoother, in a bit more of a smooth fashion. I find it's very, very normal, and if you do have depression, don't beat yourself up. You're going to have days where you literally don't want to leave bed, and frankly, you should have a couple of those days because this illness is physically exhausting. But try and very gently do things like brush your teeth, brush your hair. Sounds stupid, and I know people are probably listening being like, why? Like, you know, this is such a normal thing to do. Why would you think twice about it? For someone with depression, that is like asking them to run a marathon. So you want to start really, really small. You know, I'm talking about having a to-do list. Like, I took a shower today. I got out of bed today. Things like that can really, really help just give you a bit of momentum, and also help your self-confidence, which can be really, really debilitated during these episodes. Yes. Yeah, that's really unfortunate. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. It's really common in ADHD, which is terrible, really. It just shows how we as a society struggle to facilitate our education system around mental illness and just different ways of learning and different ways of processing information. And I'm really sorry you had to go through that, but you'll probably find you are incredibly intelligent and creative. It's the downside. You can't really go with traditional structures, but you'll find that you'll have a massive advantage in just generally being entrepreneurial, creative, having really great ideas and putting them out there. So it really sucks. And there's a really good point here, understanding what your triggers are, you know, and having ideas of what makes you feel sad, or what makes you, if you have ADHD, what makes you lose focus. It's really important just to see what they are and write them down. And that goes for anyone. If you have times during this lockdown where you're feeling really low, or if you have times, for instance, as I was mentioning, you know, you're doing the work as a white ally and suddenly you feel triggered, write it down. What's going on? What's coming up for you? How does your body feel? It's really important that we actually don't, you know, I know there's I know people say we're more open about mental health, but I know maybe it's because I'm into martial arts. There is such a stigma against people who feel their feelings and just generally want to be in touch with their feelings a bit more. But it's really important that we acknowledge what's going on and honour those feelings. It's really natural. So get writing them down. You know, I end up writing a bloody essay when I end up with my feelings. It's like I've opened the floodgates, but it means I can really understand why I'm feeling that way. For instance, if I feel a good example, for instance, if I feel kind of weirdly lonely or upset that my boyfriend's not as huggy or as kissy as me one day, I feel upset. And then I write it down and I realise, whoa, hang on, that's just because of maybe like a past trauma, or I'm quite physical with my affection, and that day, even though he did literally nothing wrong, he had a long work day, or he was doing something really productive and he just wanted to rest, I took that as a slight onto me, but it's not at all. It's just a very normal human reaction. So my feelings, even though they're valid, I don't have to act on them, and I can write them down, and I can feel much better in myself after by fulfilling that need of affection, by playing a video game, by ringing my mum, by doing something that doesn't have to be acted out, if that makes sense. So once you understand the trigger and the way you're viewing that event, you can really change your actions. Journaling is really, really good. And I think people think you have to journal every day in a formal way. It doesn't. Like, it doesn't at all. You can literally just start scribbling down. Sip of tea again. Mind mapping, colours, whatever works for you. I find I like to journal. I like to kind of have like my formal journaling, like, you know, making a little, oh, thanks guys, that's very sweet. Thanks, it's the trauma. Writing down everything I need to do in a very formal way. And then my other journal for emotions is that when I feel triggered, I try and write it down, and I find it really helps. So there is a really, really good method used in dialectical behaviour therapy and mentalization-based therapy. And now these therapies tend to be used for people who have borderline personality disorder symptoms or depressive symptoms, but like, you can use these for literally anything. Like, it doesn't mean you have borderline personality disorder, it doesn't mean you have a diagnosis or anything. It just means they're a very useful tool for dealing with emotion. So, for instance, in DBT, we look dialectical behaviour therapy. There are methods of how people view the world. So when we're young, when we're a child, we often end up creating these things called schemas, which are basically how we view ourselves and how we view the world. Now, schemas can become very, very hard to break down when you're older in therapy, because they end up being like your whole world, right? Your whole world view. And if someone says to you, oh, that's not how it's meant to be, it can crush you. So for instance, if for instance, as a child, and By the way, I don't talk from experience here. I had an amazing childhood. I was really lucky. My parents were very supportive. But if a child got neglected or abused by their parents, they might end up having a schema saying they might not be able to trust anyone, or they're not very worthy. And this can replicate in behaviours. So what's interesting is when we look at triggers, I'm using a really extreme example, I know, but when we look at triggers in our daily life, we can start to understand where our emotions and triggers come from, and then we can start to do the work on that event. So, that's why I think therapy is a great idea for those who can afford it, because you are able to, and if you are suffering from certain emotional ups and downs, because you're able to take control of those triggers and what happened in the past, and you don't let it define you, you're able to go back and work on yourself in a way that means you don't let that event control you. Hello. Let me just have a look at that question. Oh, Pomodoro time technique is brilliant. Great point. I'm going to talk about that because I'm really sorry. I'm going to use your username, ADXN, because I don't want to get your name wrong. And I don't want to be offensive. Sorry. The user ADXN put a great, hello, Cisco, a great point about time techniques and productivity called the Pomodoro time technique. And basically, without going into too much detail, our brains can only process so much information at once, like an hour and a half. So the Pomodoro time technique breaks it down to around 25 minutes of hard work. 25 minutes hard work and then you get a 5 minutes break, and it's really, really great if you're doing like a big project because it breaks it down. That's a really good one. I'd recommend Googling that one because I've used it before, but I end up getting really sucked into my work. I think it's Asperger's, where I just get obsessed about a topic, so I don't use that one that much. But it's excellent. It's a really, really good way of managing your time and being motivated to do what you want to do, because it breaks it up into a much more concise and easy format. But yeah, productivity, I would recommend starting really, really small, because when we're looking at that's cool. I haven't heard those apps. Oh, I'll give those a go. Great, thanks for the suggestion. Amazing. So productivity is an interesting one, because when we think about habit forming and behavior change and wanting to take a new habit, or to suddenly take on like several new hobbies, or start a new course, the brain gets very overwhelmed. The brain can only take so much. Like I said before, it doesn't like change. It likes to feel safe, otherwise it acts out. So weirdly enough, it might seem like counterintuitive, but you want to start with the least amount of work possible. It's very similar to the Pomodoro technique, actually. You want to start literally doing like one thing a day that's new. So for instance, with my clients, when I talk about like changing diet or exercise, I say to them, right, just go for a 20-minute walk early in the morning, or for breakfast, if you do have breakfast, have something like with the 20 grams of protein in, something really simple that they can follow. And I start them on that one habit change a week. So if you want to be productive, say you want to do more reading, and say you want to read more, literally say, okay, tomorrow I'm going to do 10 minutes of reading, or I'm going to read 10 pages. Don't do any more. Don't say you're going to do any more. And then over time, your brain recognizes this new habit as a safe, welcoming, and very useful behavioral trait. And it doesn't want to freak out anymore. So then you can start building up. So I think for productivity, start small, baby steps. And then your brain will realize the benefits of doing that activity outweigh the cons of maybe feeling overwhelmed or working too much, and then you will be able to accumulate that as a new hobby, and then it will become effortless. So start small, add up over time, and then your brain will just tick it off. The neural highways will think this is cool. We're gonna roll with this, and then it will be added on. It will be added into almost like a subconscious or automatic behavior. So yes. Oh, thanks guys. That was really kind. Right, guys. Well, we've chatted for nearly 45 minutes. Yes, the baby steps is really, really good. I like them a lot. I think it's a really useful method. I still do them. My to-do list now each day is like maximum 2 things, even though I do end up doing more than 2, but it means I know I'm going to get those 2 important things done, because I'm not overwhelming my brain with information, and my brain feels pretty cool at doing with them. So that's a useful tool. But guys, it's been like 45 minutes. I don't want to end up rambling on. About nutrition, mental. Yes, of course. Okay, I'll talk about these 2 things. Thanks for the questions. I feel very flattered. So there's a lot of research about nutrition for mental health. It's a very new science, so we can't really say for definite what works and what doesn't. Also, I'm not a registered nutritionist. Registered nutritionists will have much more knowledge on the subject than I will. So I'm really sorry if I get this wrong. But I would go to someone like an RDA. I can send you the link to some good ones that I might think are decent on this topic. But I just know some of the psychology behind some of the foods. So I would recommend for mental health, you want to be increasing your protein intake because oh, thank you so much. No, I will go live again. Thank you. This has been very fun. I liked it. So you want to be increasing your protein because your protein literally makes up of everything. Your brain, your muscles, literally your skin does your skinny thing, the nails, everything. It helps you function, right? So you want to be increasing your protein, which sounds weird, but you do, because it actually helps your brain function. And in general, certain vegetables and fruits like blueberries and mushrooms have been shown to have very good immune support. Remember, I don't say immune boosting, but immune supportive properties, which can reduce inflammation in the brain, which has been cited in studies to improve general mental health and well-being. My God, very, very kind. Thank you so much. There was a question, I think, again. I hope I answered that, by the way, okay-ishly. I'm not an expert. There are some people who are better at that on me, so I will hopefully try and find you their profile and link you to them. I'm just going to find the question that I saw. I think I lost it. Motivated during your hard times. That's a great question. Thank you for your compliment, by the way. That's very, very kind. Very sweet. I'm a massive nerd, so it helps. I just write things I'm interested in and that I think might be useful. So often it depends on how bad the depressive episode is, if that makes sense. So if my depressive episode is really bad, I kind of just let myself have a day where I can wallow and feel, because I find that way the emotions pass quicker, and then I can get back to doing my thing. So I let myself feel, first of all. And second of all, I kind of remind myself is that, you know, this is such a cheesy thing to say, but it's true. If you've had really, really hard times before and this today is another really hard day, think of all those really difficult days you've experienced, and yet you've still come up the other side. You've still managed to get back onto your workload. You've still managed to function in society again. So it's very, very possible and very likely you will get out of this in the same way. Yes, yeah, and it will improve your sport, Carrie. It really will. It will help you perform. It will help you recover. Protein, animal and plant-based, whichever way you do it. Fantastic option just for feeling really good. And yes, so if I find that I'm having a really low day and I really need to be motivated, I might cancel a client or I might do something for me. Because remember, it depends. If you're mentally ill, it's an illness. So again, sick days is really a natural thing and a normal thing. And then conversely, if it's just a bad day mentally, try and again think of 3 things you can do that you're looking forward to after the period of work that has to be done. So for me, if I feel like I'm having a really bad day, but I'm not quite depressed enough to stay in bed, I might think, well, after work, I can go for a walk. Well, after work, I can do some yoga. Well, after work, I can play some video games. I can read, I can write, I can draw. I can have all the time in the world to myself. And that kind of acts as like my little lighthouse to guide me through, if that makes sense. But yes, if it is a depressive episode, I'm very kind to myself pretty much, and I just let myself wallow like a sad little bean. But then it does work. It means because I validate my emotions, I feel much better after. I haven't denied myself it. I don't think I'm unworthy or crazy. I feel like I've done the work, and I feel like, yeah, I'm ill. So of course, if you're ill, you're going to need to recover. I hope that helps. Yes, routine is key. Routine, even like little things, like little routines can really help. Right, guys, I don't want to ramble on anymore because I know I do ramble. But thank you guys so much for listening. I will be doing another one of these again, hopefully soon, because I did really enjoy it. And if you enjoyed it, then that's even cooler. And it will be recorded. So, you know, I know you're watching this, but you know, you can watch it again. No point if you're not watching it for me to say that, but you know what I'm saying. And I hope you have a great day. And I hope some of this advice was very useful for you. And stay safe, stay healthy, and make sure that you're doing lots of work for yourself and for others. Bye, guys.